Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Parent Education Series, which is sponsored by Konick and Associates. My name is Dr. Lisa Konick. I am a clinical psychologist and founder of Konick and Associates, which is a group practice specializing in child and family behavioral health and psychological testing services. Today I have with me Pam Valle of Valle Educational Consultants, and today this is featuring our second segment of our series, which is navigating the ever-changing educational climate during the COVID pandemic. And today, Pam, who is a college admissions specialist, is going to be speaking to us about planning the college admissions process. Welcome to our talk today, Pam. We're very excited to have you and hear about how students. Yes, welcome. And I know students, at least a lot of our clients and families, are expressing a lot of stress and unique stress. I think college planning is always a very stressful process, and I know Pam's going to be telling us more about that. But uniquely during COVID, things are changing. So we're excited to be talking to you about how to help your students, especially the juniors and seniors in high school right now, many who are doing remote learning and stressed about how they're going to prepare their college applications and prepare for college. So I'd like to talk a little bit, introduce Pam more specifically and what she does. And please feel free, if you're watching live, to post your questions. I want to put a caveat out there. This is a free event, and we do not have any payment requests for information. So please be aware, scammers are requesting payment information in response to posts. So please do not respond to any links or provide any credit card information or payment information. I'm going to introduce you, Pam, and then we'll get into our questions that people are interested in hearing about today. Pam Valle is the founder of Valle Educational Consultants. She has worked with hundreds of families creating and executing goals and objectives for college search, selection, and admissions planning that protect other priorities impacting the family. Planning for college takes an experienced, multifaceted professional. To meet the needs of an ever-changing, complex college climate, Pam draws on 20 plus years in organizational consulting and coaching, with 15 years spent in the college admissions consulting realm. She spends her time with families determining their students' individual college-related needs. A mother of college graduates herself, Pam has felt the impact of rising college costs and understands the importance of overall college planning. Welcome, Pam.
Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate that. I'm exhausted just listening to it all. I've been doing this a long time, so I don't often hear my intro.
Tell us a little bit more about how your firm helps families plan for this role of the college applications process.
Sure. Well, we have always specialized in the admissions side of things. So there's kind of most families would divvy up the college experience into kind of the financial planning side, if you will. What's it going to cost? How are we going to pay for it? And then how are we going to get in the applications and preparing for the admissions side? And we are clearly admissions specialists. I have some wonderfully competent people that work with me. I am the primary consultant that works with my families, but we specialize in all kinds of areas related to the admissions process and related to where students kind of come into that. So it's kind of a free ebb and flow of serving the needs of the student based on where they are at the time when they engage with us, and then taking them all the way through to whatever their end goal is. And that can include things related to students that are trying to determine what their major is going to be, what their interest, aptitudes, and abilities are, and what does that mean as far as majors, and what schools are they going to attend, and that whole search and selection process, interviews, and certainly the application phase and essays. And certainly seniors right now are grappling with recommendation letters and essays and all those tedious little tasks that need to be done for applications. So that's very much a core part of what we do, as well, is to coach and guide and review, and obviously help students through that whole process. We also do ACT and SAT prep. And I do a lot of interview prep and role play related to scholarships and just admissions in general. So we kind of span the spectrum of admissions coverage for whatever student needs, whether they have a special need, highly functioning, if they're looking at Ivy schools, or they're even looking for, going to a community college and wanted to transfer into another school at a later time. So we kind of broad brush on all of that.
So you're a one-stop shop for helping families navigate the entire process related to college.
Yeah, and I like to refer to myself like I'm a generalist. We generally know the whole process. We know, there's a lot of schools in this country, so not intimately every college, but very, very competent and very well experienced in many of the colleges in the application phases that students would have to navigate related to any college that they would have to because we want to consider. So yeah, we've got them covered.
And I think there's so much stress, as our practice is in Naperville, and we have an office in Orland Park, and we have a lot of variety of students that we work with that eventually are going to be considering college at the high school level. And some of them are in the special needs category, and others are really high achievers. And they have so much stress in either category on how do I prepare my application? How do I pad my application? What are the things I need to show that I'm a good candidate? So it's such a competitive market, and there's so much stress. And we do a lot of the anxiety management side in our practice. But Pam, can you talk about, or can you maybe provide some advice to high school students who are currently planning to submit applications this year? What specifically do you think college are looking for in that competitive student for an application?
Sure. Well, I think a student that goes into anything related to admissions specifically, though, should have a plan. So to just day in, day out, just sit down and think, okay, gee, what am I going to get done today without an end goal and worked out a plan would be very, very difficult. And this is a time when there's a lot of pressure right now for seniors that are applying. So I would say I'm a big proponent of saying, make a plan and work the plan. So seniors should sit down with their families, with their parents, whoever their advisors are, and make a plan for all the things that they need to get done related to college. Staying on task, that will help them to stay on task and obviously to get things done in a timely fashion. A few little tips and tricks maybe, applications that are submitted before 2 weeks before an application deadline are typically in a better situation just because the student then has time to maybe work around any issues related to an application submission before an actual deadline. So if a student is targeting an 11/1 deadline, that's a very popular deadline on November 1st, they would want to submit an application, target to submit their application no later than October 15th. That gives them some time to get confirmation from the college and work through some tasks to fix things if they have some submission issues or if the college have issues. So that would be one little tip. I see some things back up on kids every year, so that would be something that I would suggest. Work as hard as they can to get good grades. There's a lot of students that may see deferrals this year. We do see those from year to year, depending on the college. There are students that may be deferred or even waitlisted, or schools that want to further verify an admissions decision on a student and get a first year of the senior year transcript, or first semester, excuse me. So students should do as well as they can all the way through their senior year. And specifically first semester can come into play as colleges may, as I say, look at how they've been doing. For the student that's looking at a more competitive college, and this doesn't necessarily just mean Ivies, the specifics would be dependent on each college. But I would say that things that are focused on and measured fairly heavily in the admissions process, depending on the school again, would be grades, certainly, rigor of course curriculum, how did the student challenge themselves in their current high school environment, the resume, what did they do outside the class. Colleges always love to see students that do something outside of themselves to help others. So students that have had a plan all along and executed on a plan to target some sort of an area that they are interested in or a passion we hear a lot about, and have that be expressed through their outside of class and inside, but specifically outside of class activities is a good thing. And I guess you talk about the anxiety. I guess one thing that I would just counsel parents is this is a window of time that can be very stressful, but this too will end. And if there's a plan in place and people are working toward getting tasks done in a timely fashion, then that does alleviate a lot of the stress. And the noise of any background pressure from, oh, my neighbors are doing this, or oh, my daughter's girlfriend's doing this. Just stay on your own plan and execute your own plan. Don't listen to too much of the noise going on around us. And with COVID and all, certainly there is a lot, but yes, a lot has changed related to COVID and a lot hasn't changed. So I think, again, as long as people are just diligent and working with what they know and what they have control over, they'll be in good shape.
And so many questions just came up through my head as you're talking, Pam, because I'm thinking about a lot of my junior and senior students who are, freaking out, and they're saying, you know what, how many extracurriculars? I got to join every club. And, from my perspective, we're the anxiety managers, right? We're saying, right, you need to be you, and don't just create another layer of anxiety, and I wonder, Pam, your thoughts about, is it better to select some really valuable tasks, clubs, organizations that the student really enjoys being in versus quantity? I think about how many clubs are you in that you really can't get invested in versus choose a few that you really enjoy that you can say you were truly involved in. What are your thoughts about
that? Quantity does not get you necessarily anything in college. More isn't better. What college admissions really want to see is, what has the student really been excited about and interested in? And then what have they done with that interest? Mm-hmm. And that may involve one thing. Maybe they were supporting their family and had a job. Maybe they had one athletic, ability. They were a soccer player or a volleyball player, and they had an ability, and they just really, really worked hard at that particular sport. There's kids that have lots and lots of clubs, but they don't invest time in the opportunities presented with those clubs. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying they're just lists, and they can't really, and I think the challenge is, if you were asked, how did you, and pick a club on your list, what did you do for that club, and you don't have anything to say, it's not necessarily going to be a valid and useful.
No, and having the name of the club on a resume means nothing. When a student fills out an application, which the seniors are experiencing right now, they will actually put how many hours they did something per week and per year on an application. So it's not just, I attended XYZ club once a week for 9 months during the school year. It's what engagement did you have? What leadership did you have? What activities beyond that did you use to work with your peers in that area? It's more than just the club name. And clubs are great. They give kids lots of opportunities, but a list of clubs is not the target end zone, if you will, for an admissions committee when they're deciding on an applicant. It's one piece of the puzzle that shows colleges where that interest and the dimension is in the student's personality.
And can you comment on the AP dilemma? How many AP classes should I have? I must get these APs throughout my high school career because that makes me look good. And, I hear different things about AP, PM, of, some schools are not giving the extra credit, some are, what would your advice be or comments be?
And that's I get asked that question certainly all the time. And I think my initial reaction is always, there is no magic number. Mm-hmm. I go back to what I said a little bit earlier about rigor. So every family and the students and the parents know what level of competitiveness a student can handle in high school, what's reasonable for them. If they are a real stud in science and they love chem and bio and all that, then they should be excelling and challenging themselves in areas that they have a strength. If they don't like language or English or whatever else, then maybe that isn't an area that they excel in as far as rigor and challenge is concerned. So I guess I would say it's very student specific. There is no list of APs that are check boxes that you need to comply with to get into admissions. I will say that when you're looking at very highly competitive candidate pools and or Ivy schools, and I work with the broad spectrum of colleges, I've worked with them all. The more rigor you can show, certainly you're going to be a more competitive candidate.
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean that every student should have all APs, and all honors from the get-go, and they're just not going to get into any school if they don't have that. That's just certainly not the case. Challenge should be based on what's reasonable for the student and where they can excel.
And I think a lot of the stress that I see in my office when we're talking about anxiety is the difference between the parent's perspective of what the student should be doing for college and what the student's desires are. And that sense of more is better. And that can come from the student or the parent. More applications are better. You need 25 college applications. And then the student's finding themselves pretty overwhelmed, especially if they're looking for this November 1 deadline and they're saying, well, I really don't know that I can meet that deadline. What are your thoughts about how people should plan and select, these are the colleges that I want to apply to?
Yeah, that's, well, research, the initial stages of research are all, I always recommend my students, and what I do with all my candidate students is to do research online first. And it's a fairly thorough research process that I teach them and take them through so that they can evaluate, I call it the pros and cons. What do they like about colleges and what don't they like about every prospective college? And there's a variety that you start with. Big school, small school, rural school, city school, urban, proximity to home, all that kind of stuff. So narrowing down in the college process, a big radar screen of choices initially is most helpful. Don't think you aren't going to like a school out in the boondocks if you have never even looked at one or evaluated it. And then as kids start to refine what those pros and cons are for their school choices, then they will begin to have more confidence in what qualities of the school, programs, everything that they're looking for. And then that tends to drive more options. So, oh, gee, I see a student is really starting to narrow in on these urban campuses that have a geographic proximity to home of 50 miles and whatever the situation is. They have this kind of an offering. They can dual major in this. They can whatever the academic requirements are, and we start to fine tune that, and then that may bring in other schools for consideration. So to your question of the number of schools, that ultimate number of schools for application can be a wide variety. There's a suggested target sweet spot number, but that really is not dependent on every student. So what I will typically say is, if a student's list of applications is more highly leveraged, and what I mean by that is they have more stretch, highly competitive schools where they may or may not be in the sweet spot of the admissions criteria, but so is everybody else. Mm-hmm. Everybody at Harvard is going to be good. Okay. So you can't consider that a slam dunk to get in. So that would be considered a safety or a stretch. And so if a list of schools is highly leveraged that way, where most of the schools are like that, then you're going to want a larger number of applications because you're going to need to have a backup option. I call that your plan A, those schools. And then there's plan B, the ones where you will attend, they do serve your needs, but they maybe aren't your top priority schools. So that list of schools needs to be balanced ultimately. And what I work with families to do is, what does that school list look like? What's reasonable for this student? And the number 8 comes to mind, and that is not a magic number, but usually somewhere around 8 school applications would be, you've got a top couple of elite target schools and sweet spot schools in their plan A if you want. And then you've got some really good solid backup target and maybe even safeties. And safeties would be schools where the student is above the criteria for admission. They're in scholarship territory. They're highly, highly competitive. Nothing's a done deal until admission says so, but you can certainly gauge based on a lot of criteria where the competitive edge is going to be for the student in that pool.
Yeah, I think these are hard decisions because I think students and parents have different views on them, and it's hard for them to come together. So that might be where both of us can assist families in different ways with those challenges.
Yeah, I think navigating the conversation can be, excuse me, especially this time of year, can be challenging. But I think if people, again, keep an open mind and have worked a plan. So there's an agreement on how this is all going to sort of unfold. There aren't too many pitfalls really that come into play. There are disappointments certainly, and we can't guarantee a lot in this process, but we can control some pieces. And I think the control is where I work with families. I'm focusing on what can we control, and let's nail that. And then what's not under control, we just have to do the best we can to navigate that when the situations present themselves.
Well, and that goes into the next question that we had posed, Pam, is what can students who had initially hoped to highlight their involvement in student clubs, community service activities, or athletics do at this time during COVID to address these perceived gaps in their application? Because they're not able to do as many things as they may have hoped to highlight. And we don't know when that's going to be available to them. And some of them are applying now.
Right. Well, colleges are obviously well aware of COVID and its impact on students' lives, and specifically seniors. This is a difficult year this year because there's been testing dates that have just evaporated at the very last minute, and we've got all kinds of things that are pivotal to the admissions process that are really kind of challenging for us. But I think related to gaps in anything, if a student feels they have a gap anywhere, whether it's academic or they have a gap in their extracurricular engagement, whatever that is, and they feel that more light needs to be shed for admissions to give admissions perspective on whatever this gap is, they should create an outline or a document and kind of for themselves run through exactly how they want to portray this gap and how they can show admissions that what the setback was or what the impact was, but then how they're spinning out of it, what the positive is. So there is an explanation area on most applications. Common App certainly has one where do you want to tell us anything else, additional comments? And you can put a statement there to shed light on any aspect of a trial or a setback, COVID related or unrelated, on the application. There are specific COVID added questions this year that a guidance counselor can specifically speak to. So a recommendation letter, if you will, or a guidance counselor can shed light on a student's impact on COVID or otherwise. And then the student also has an additional prompt that they can answer related to COVID specifically. But besides that, there's always been the additional insight piece if you want to add that for the admissions people. So those are just some things that people don't typically consider, that their counselor or people outside of their typical impact, surroundings, parents and all, can really shed light on anything that the student's gone through that is out of the ordinary and has had whatever negative impact on them. But I always tell kids, if you've had a negative impact, or if you're still in the negative impact, you're still reeling from something, you've got to start talking to admissions as if you see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
How are you going to spin out of this, and how is it going to be a positive? Because they're going to look to say, okay, great, but you're going to have trouble in college. What are you going to do to bounce from it? And
right.
That attribute in students.
So really taking control of the situation rather than to say, I'm going to try to ignore that and hope nobody notices.
Right. I would say get out in front of the conversation. Just be told to be out in front of the conversation.
So it's the elephant in the room. We're just going to bring it out and talk about it. So
that's
good advice.
Right.
What about this test optional admissions, Pam? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, test optional has always been around, interestingly enough. I should say always, for a very long time. But it didn't really come into serious play and consideration until this year with the, like I said, the evaporation of some test dates. Test optional is when the college gives the student to do just that, have the option to submit a test score when they apply. So when they apply, they can submit an ACT or SAT, or don't have to set an ACT or SAT. And they actually check that box or answer that question on their application. And then when they say they are test optional, they wish to be considered without a score, then the school will consider all the other elements that come into play. And the students will not be just, there's no discrimination, if you will, in a test optional environment at all. The student just doesn't want to report the score for whatever reason. There is not always, and one thing I'm glad you asked this, because there's not always a benefit to test optional. And even this year, many of the students that I'm working with are, even though they've had a severe restriction on their options for testing, they are not going test optional because there are two important things to consider. Colleges have scholarships available to students, and many times, not always, and the students need to do their research, many times those scholarships require that a score be submitted as part of the criteria for evaluation. So if you apply test optional to a college and you find out, gee, I really want to apply for that scholarship, and you don't have a test score that's been submitted, you aren't in line for that scholarship. So make sure to do the research there. The other thing about test optional is there are situations with majors, specific academic areas, where general admissions does not require that you submit a score, but to be a strong competitive candidate in their specialized biomolecular, whatever example program, you do need to have a score. So these are the things that a consultant can help you to work through, certainly. But just to make sure that you ticked all those boxes and make sure when you're applying, test optional or not, exactly that you understand how the impact is going to be for that particular college.
That's a very good point. Thank you for that, Pam. Yeah. What guidance can you provide families on navigating the ACT/SAT process right now for the rising juniors, given the impact of COVID? It's one of the questions.
Sure. Yeah, we do ACT and SAT prep, and we have seen an interesting shift in it. Not dramatic, but a little bit of a shift. And I think the advice I would give to juniors right now is they're going to see a strict limitation on seats available this fall to test, should they want to, because a lot of those seats are really reserved or getting grabbed by seniors that are trying to retest and get a final score or final scores for their admissions application. So where we might typically see a junior test in the fall of their junior year right now, many are waiting and doing it maybe in December, but many will be waiting until spring of 2021 to start their testing. And the reason for that is because there's going to be more seats available. And secondly, it gives them more time to prep. And with the change in the remote learning and a lot of things academically for families, still navigating this at-home situation, parents are opting to choose to wait a little bit until the spring, with obviously the hope that there's going to be testing options in the spring. And I think we will see, obviously the ACTs and SATs are slowly getting on board to bring about changes that are necessary for this remote learning experience that we're having. So that would be one thing, is just to understand your options. You can go out to the ACT or the SAT site and look at all the test dates that are currently posted that are coming up and kind of plan and strategize. The one thing I would say regarding prep for tests, because we do a lot of prep with Valle Educational, is that you would want to start prep for an ACT or an SAT if you've never prepped before, at least 6 or 8 weeks before your first testing date. So if a student's going to test in December of 2020 for their first time, they would want to start in October-ish, start that prep for that first test. And that's so that when going in cold to those, some people think that's a great idea. I have seen over the years that not to really be a very fruitful way of going about the process. And I think the more confident and prepared a student is out of the gate for a testing situation, the better the result. So I would just suggest that people consider prep. Every student, no matter what, right there in a subject area, can benefit from prep for ACT and SAT. And that's not just because I do it. I've just seen the results and the score improvements. And I would just recommend that they consider that as well.
And that's good to have a gauge in time too, because I think everybody's timelines are off. And we really don't know how to manage some of these timelines right now. There's so much uncertainty that draws into it. And this process in and of itself has a lot of uncertainty embedded into it already. So
and the thing I wanted to add, the one thing I meant to add, that there are practice tests out there. So for students that aren't quite sure, I don't know if I want to do an ACT or an SAT, which is very much a dilemma for juniors right now. I'm just not sure which test I like and what I'm going to do the best in. Take some practice tests. There's free ones online. And we will look at we will review scores for those tests. We will say, okay, this is maybe where you're going to be a stronger, but here's why. And we'll help the student to work through maybe where to focus. But practice tests can also help students in this fall time where they really can't get a test date potentially.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, to starting to lean into where would be my best buck spent and also where my best time will be spent.
Now, do schools prefer one or another, or are they offering the opportunity now that you can choose as a student which one you want to submit?
Yeah, the colleges have always offered they will take an ACT or an SAT or both.
Okay.
So yeah, there's no, some regions of the country tend to lean more heavily in ACT or SAT country, but that doesn't mean that a student, that submits something that's an ACT or SAT can't be considered. So yes, there's no specific. Now, some schools will do what's called super scoring, which will take the best components of a scoring sessions, multiple sessions. Some schools will only super score an SAT, and some schools will only super score an ACT. So that's something to be aware of. But as far as receiving scores, yep, whatever you want to do.
There's a lot of things to think about, Pam. Good thing.
There are a lot of things to think about. Yeah, right.
Any tips or suggestions that you might offer to families who are looking into scholarships or even financial aid ideas?
Sure. One thing.
That's a broad question, but you maybe.
Well, it is, but let me. It's interesting that you asked that because, of course, I'm in the season right now of all this, and as kids are trying to get their applications done, the furthest thing from their mind right now as a senior is really thinking about scholarships. But that's a really important component, and most parents appreciate that their students are considering scholarships or at least have that on their radar. So I think what I would say is related to scholarships. There are quite often interviews and essays involved in applying for scholarships. So there's local scholarships, there's scholarships available through colleges, there's the AAUWs and the Rotaries and all kinds of community scholarships. There's a variety of scholarships. So students, again, should make a plan, set time aside to research those, and then allocate time for the essay and any interview that they're offered to go after those scholarships. But they need to do their research and they need to look at what the dollars are they're offered and what's the biggest bang for their buck really as far as time spent. Related to financial aid, the one thing that a lot of people aren't familiar with, and we don't counsel in the paying for college aspect, but I always say I know enough to be dangerous because I've been doing this a long time. And financial aid, when you file FAFSA, which is the primary document that students or families file for financial aid consideration, looks back 2 years. So as a sophomore in high school, if a family believes that they're going to be filing and wanting financial consideration from a college, they should be finalizing their planning for how they're going to pay for college, assets, income, all that kind of stuff, sophomore year of high school. Because when you file FAFSA, when your student is going off to college, they look back 2 years. So the 2-year impact, then you could, as a sophomore, if they're a sophomore in high school, you can proactively plan what the colleges will be seeing instead of having to be sitting there as you're filing FAFSA when they're going to college and going, shoot, I wish I had done this 2 years ago so I could, strategize a little better or getting more money.
So this would be with their financial advisor, their private personal financial advisor.
There are some college consultants that specialize in specifically FAFSA and the financial planning aspect of things. I used to be with a group that did that many years ago. So like I said, I know enough to be dangerous. But yes, that would certainly be a financial planning thing. I can work with a financial planner to help them with understanding the pitfalls and how to navigate assets and income that FAFSA and the CSS profile, which is another form, how they'll come into play and the impact there. But yes, this would definitely be a financial conversation with their advisor.
Good to know. That's very useful, Pam. Thank you for that. Excuse me. We have a little bit, we were kind of getting close to the end of time here, but if you have a few more minutes, can we go through a couple more questions?
Sure.
How about goodness of fit for selecting a college? Any thoughts about that for students? Because I think students are very overwhelmed by, they might not even know what they want to major in.
Right.
Any thoughts about how to help kids guide how to make those selections? I know we talked about not knowing rural versus urban versus, where they want to, but any other ideas about what should they be doing as they're looking at colleges if they're not sure, or determining what's good for them?
Sure. Well, and again, like you say, it's really dependent on every student, and it's unique. Every single one of my students goes about this selection and the pros and cons, if you will, and the criteria that are important to them in a completely different way. So I think what's important to understand with finding fit is what's fit when you first start the process is going to change. Parents work with their students to help them through this process, and I'm sure they're going to be involved to some degree. Just because Johnny or Susie have changed their mind 13 times, that's normal. So what they're going to think they want to start out with, it should be an evolving process because they're becoming educated, they're visiting campuses, they're participating in webinars and webcasts and things where they're gathering more information and starting to compare the apples to the oranges and get a sense of what they're looking for. And so the criteria is school size, it's proximity to home, it's how competitive they want the nature of the academics to be, it's the vibe on campus, it's the sports. A lot of kids, hey, do they have my intramural sport? I want to play D1, D2, D3. I work with a lot of fine art kids and athletes. So that's a big component for them. So all those things come into play, but how to prioritize them is very student specific. And again, if a parent wants help with that, certainly they can get it. People like myself can help work with the student to evaluate that and then bring schools to the forefront that will fit that criteria so that they can then assess exactly what that's going to look like for them. And again, this list of schools and this criteria is going to change. So I would just be open to change in this process of finding a good fit. The other thing that I want to be sure to make a point of is, and during COVID, this has been very important, is students haven't been able to go to campus to get a real feel for campus, right? Yeah, and it's been a challenge, and we're also in-person focused. So going online, taking the virtual tours, emailing the admissions department, emailing a department head to ask them questions at a college if you can't find the answer online, participating in the web events, talking to alums, things like that, that all really helps to build confidence in what fit will be for one school versus another.
And that's one of the big concerns we've had a lot of the seniors from last year concerned about, and currently this year too. They're like, I'm not sure how to visit these campuses. We're going to the campus with my family. We're driving around, but we can't go into any of the buildings. There's no students. They may not even be able to have an in-person conversation or a tour. So it is definitely stressful, but it sounds like, Pam, colleges are well aware of this problem, and they sound like they're doing some workarounds with the virtual aspects of it. That
Absolutely. And for people that are more technology challenged, it's going to be maybe a little longer runway to get used to this. But that the remote access has always been there. It just hasn't been the focus because we haven't had the removal of the in-person experience. But I think it can still be somewhat of a demonstrated interest in an engaged process, but it's just going to look a little different. And again, I think for the person that embraces the opportunities that admissions presents now, instead of seeing it as a burden and, oh gosh, now I can't do that, gee, I'll never be able to decide on a college. Yes, you will. It's just, we're just going to go about it a little bit different way. And so that's just an important mindset, I think, that would be healthy and helpful as people navigate.
Great. One more question, and this is one that you and I have collaborated on in the past before, Pam, is what about students that have special needs, special learning needs, IEPs? They're really concerned about their competitiveness, and also finding schools for parents that have individual students with special needs really want a very certain specific programming. Student services is going to be offering supports. One of the things we talk about when we're doing the assessment side is this particular student may need a lot of executive functioning support. They may need a study coach. They they may need somebody to support them, even though they're academically capable, for the organizational side of things. So what thoughts or comments do you have, or how do you find yourself working with families who have students that might have a special education need?
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about here, as you allude to, but let me touch on some important components. An IEP in high school or an IEP in the lower, pre-college years doesn't translate perfectly and exactly into college. Colleges are not required to honor or support a student. So that's one thing to understand. Now, there are, to your question, many colleges that have some phenomenal programs and structure in place and actually focus specifically on students with learning differences. So there's a multitude of colleges to consider. Just understand that not all colleges are required to support any particular learning difference, and not all colleges are going to have the same level of support across the board. So school A and school B and school C will probably look very, very different depending on what the student's needs are. So that's the first thing to understand. IEPs and 504s do not exactly translate. Now, when you're considered for accommodation in college, whatever that looks like, your college may, depending on the program, may and likely will ask for supporting documentation, your IEP, your 504, any diagnoses, things like that, assessments, so that they can review that and see what they can do to give the student the support that they need. So again, getting out in front of this conversation, Lisa, for families, getting out in front of, this is what my need is, this is what my school has done for me in the past, this is how I see myself being the most successful. How can you help me with that? What are the gaps? Getting out in front of that conversation is extremely important before settling in on a college list. Mm-hmm. The other thing to make sure, and you and I have worked on this a lot, is getting all documentation in order right about sophomore year for a student that's going to apply senior year. Because again, with that look back period, even though it's not a financial aid situation, sometimes it takes time for assessments to be updated. They haven't seen it for a year. They haven't had an assessment for a while. They need to have updated documentation on their diagnoses. Get all that information started in the wheel turning sophomore year, so you're not spinning and freaking out as the application season comes, trying to go back now and plug everything in for the application season. So just get those wheels turning a little bit earlier. Speaking with guidance about how they incorporate any learning difference needs or accommodations into their letter, the high school recommendation letter, is extremely important. Mm-hmm. And I guess I would say, lastly, for families to contact, not have any fear in contacting the disability services offices at any college, to ask them for directions, suggestions. Hey, I'm a freshman, I'm a sophomore in high school. I'm really interested in ultimately applying to your college. And what will you need? Here's my situation. What will you need? What do I need to do? And all that, the technical elements of the documentation and all just tend to be a little bit of a sticking point when it comes to application time. Oh, gee, we didn't know we needed this. Oh, gee, we didn't know that. So if you can get ahead of that, there's less stress. And it makes it a whole lot easier for colleges.
And I actually notice when we're working with students and when we're doing our own evaluations for student needs and making recommendations, a lot of these student disability service programs, or whatever they call it on their campus, have their information published on their websites too. So that's a good resource. I think people can look and see what types of accommodations or what would be needed in terms of paperwork. They
do. The thing I will say, and this will be a challenge maybe for some families, but they can measure how reasonable this is based on their student situation, is I really advise, well, all students for that matter should contact admissions and be their own self-advocate in the process. But especially for kids with learning differences, if they can be the contact person, whether they're sending the email, yes, mom and dad can help them craft, or certainly people like me can, but even getting on the phone and making those personal contacts. Disability services and colleges love to talk directly with the applicant that they're going to be considering. And they're building rapport and building relationship, and they're showing their self-confidence, they're showing their self-advocacy. There's lots of qualities get portrayed there. which intrinsically impact the admissions process without our actually being able to quantify it. So I'm all about get your students as involved as possible, give them some ownership. Mom and dad don't need to, dictate every piece of this. And actually it's to the benefit of the student if they don't.
Good to know. Any resources, Pam, how can people connect with you? We can,
Sure.
we'll put this on our link as well.
Sure. Well, my website is www.valeeducationalconsultants, it's a long word, valeeducationalconsultants.com.
And then VALLE.
There, yep, lots of, we have some documents, materials available, videos. So there certainly is enough there to get people started and directed. If there's further questions that people have, they're more than welcome to contact my office, which is 630-557-9201. I'm in the Chicago suburbs, so I am in the Midwest, but I service families and take care of students all across the country. So I am not someone that's just working with people in just my local area. As a matter of fact, I have quite a few that aren't in the area right now. Feel free to call, even though that's a Chicago exchange. And then email is info@valconsulting.net. So info@valconsulting.net. And Val is just like my name on the screen, VALLE.
And we will be posting this video also on our website, as well as our Facebook page. And Pam, you're going to have it on yours as well at konickandassociates.com. Now, Pam, you also are a contributor to our college blog.
Yes.
How do they're interested?
Yeah, we have a blog and all the updated blogs, and there's a variety of topics, lots and lots and lots of blogs. So that all can be found on our website. There's an actual tab, and for seniors right now, that it might be a wise thing to go out there and maybe pick through some of the topics, because I tend to refresh topics based on where we are in the calendar year, so they'll resonate with people that are living it at that moment. So there's always some new, fresh information, but I think there's a lot out there right now for people that are working on the application process that might be very valuable.
Great. Thank you so much, Pam. And we'll find you on Twitter too. We'll post your Twitter account on the
all the social medias. I'm out there, Instagram and everything. Thank you so much, Lacey. I appreciate
everyone for tuning in. And thank you again, Pam. And hopefully you, if you need to reach us, we'll post that information on both of our sites. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.